Welcome, everybody, to the Jacobin Show. My name is David Griscom, and I'll be your host, coming to y'all from the great state of Texas here in Austin. We got a wonderful program for y'all today. We're going to be joined in just a little bit by Jasper Nathaniel to talk about the West Bank. But before we get into that, we have a special report from our super producer, my good friend and comrade, Matt Leck, all the way from the Department of War. Matt, what's going on here?
Yeah, in the news this week, our boy Pete Hegseth of Fox News fame, people might want to look up the video of him throwing an axe to show his sort of judgment, sort of embodied in a clip. But Pete Hegseth is in a little bit of hot water because he's throwing an admiral under the bus for a September 2nd incident where he is alleged to have spoken an order. And whether he spoke this or it was sort of implicit is sort of less interesting to me, but to kill everyone aboard a boat that they're alleging was smuggling drugs in the Caribbean. This is, of course, I believe the first boat strike. And when two survivors were detected after the first strike, a guy named Admiral Frank M. Bradley is said to have ordered a second strike to comply with Hegseth's directive there. 11 people were killed total. Now, this is being investigated as a war crime because if people are struggling to stay alive in this sort of fashion, you cannot just kill them because they are no longer they're no longer an actual threat. Now, even Chris Van Hollen, the senator, has said that that's if you assume this is a war, which it is not, in which case even the first strike would have been murder. But so Pete Hegseth is saying here, we'll play a clip of him here earlier this week with a very tired Donald Trump. I think he might need a little bit more of whatever they're putting in the top of his hand that's causing that bruising. But here is Pete Hegseth defending himself and, you know, kind of standing up for the admiral, but also saying, look, I wasn't there, man.
White bales are not Christmas gifts from Santa. This is drugs running on motor fast boats or submarines that we've also struck. No one's fishing on a submarine. And I have empowered them to make that call. Now, the first couple of strikes, as any leader would want, you want to own that responsibility. So I said, I'm going to be the one to make the call after getting all the information and make sure it's the right strike. That was September 2nd. There's a lot of intelligence that goes into that, building that case and understanding that. A lot of people providing information. I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting. A couple of hours later, I learned that that commander had made which he had the complete authority to do, and by the way, Admiral Bradley made the correct decision to ultimately sink the boat and eliminate the threat. He sunk the boat, and eliminated the threat. And it was the right call. We have his back, and the American people are safer because narco-terrorists know.
Now, again, no evidence has been shared about this narco-terrorism, but I would just emphasize the point of why is it so important that you emphasize that you weren't in the room and that you left it when that order was given, supposedly with your, I guess, okay, was it your authority, Pete? And if you were still in the room and did see those people in the water, what would your direct order have been? You know, assuming you were not too busy, I don't know, getting an early lunch or something. But I'm curious your feelings on this, David.
I mean, what they're doing is absolutely horrendous. And I think the fact that you're seeing Hegseth sweat it so much shows that there's a guilty conscience. And there's a worry that now that this report has come out that they did this double tap strike, that there will be repercussions, and there should be in any functional democracy, frankly. And, waging war against people on boats in the Caribbean has nothing to do with keeping America safe or looking out for everyday people here. This is everything to do with a kind of strongman vanity project of both Hegseth and Trump. And, I think that it really risks, frankly, creating some division between the Trump administration and members of the military, because you're seeing very clearly here, if you're a member of the military, that Hegseth and the Trump administration will throw you under the bus the second that they think it will give them some kind of protection. Not to mention the fact that they are actively engaging and pushing people to follow illegal orders, which, as you kind of noted before, but it just should be made as explicit as possible. Yes, the whole idea that this is a war zone is laughable in the first place. Second of all, even if it were, this is something that is explicitly prohibited. The sinking of people who are shipwrecked, the striking people who are shipwrecked, is explicitly prohibited in the Pentagon manual. Not just as a hey, these are a list of things. It's hey, this is an extremely clear example of what is against the law when it comes to U.S. engagement and conflict. So look, these are people who are, one, going to put you in dangerous situations, unethical, immoral situations, and second of all, they will throw you under the bus the first opportunity that they get if they think that it will protect their hide from consequences for their action. Well, folks, we have a really incredible conversation to share with y'all. We are joined by Jasper Nathaniel, who is an excellent journalist. Everybody should subscribe to Infinite Jazz to keep up with his work and support his work. But we're going to be talking about the West Bank, some unique and rare good news, and much, much more. So enjoy this conversation, folks, and thank you so much for tuning into The Jacobin Show. Welcome back, everybody, to The Jacobin Show. David here, joined as always, though he is in hiding, by Mr. Matt Leck, watching over us very, very safely. And I'm very thrilled to be bringing on for the first time to The Jacobin Show, journalist Jasper Nathaniel. Jasper, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Jasper is somebody whose work I really, really respect, and he does a lot of important work covering what's happening in the West Bank. And we're going to get into some of the kind of contemporary stories and some of the lay of the land, because I think that there's obviously been a lot of focus on what's happening in Gaza. But Jasper, I mean, this has been a pretty incredible past week for a lot of the subjects and things that you've been covering. And we actually have some positive news to cover here. So could you talk us through what happened with Mohammed Ibrahim?
Yeah, so I know it's bizarre to have something positive to talk about. Mohammed is a 16-year-old kid. He was born in Florida, and he lives in a town called Al-Mazrah al-Sharqiyya with his family. They split time between there and around the Palm Beach area in Florida, and they are part of a population of Palestinian Americans. There's about, I think 60,000 is the last number I heard, that are American citizens who have roots in the West Bank, and so they have dual citizenship. Some of them don't have any Palestinian citizenship at all, but they go back and forth. And basically in February, he was in the middle of the night, 3 a.m, 25, 30 Israeli soldiers just showed up at his house, demanded, his father Zahir got the door. They forced their way in, asked where his bedroom was, went into his bedroom. At the time he was 15. They didn't tell the family what they were doing. They didn't tell Mohammed what they were doing. Of course they had their machine guns pointed, as they always do. And they zip tied, blindfolded him, and just took him away. The family did not know where he'd been taken. They had no information at all for several days. By the time they were able to get some information, what they learned is that Mohammed and 3 friends, who are all 15, 16 years old, were being accused of throwing rocks at an Israeli vehicle. Mohammed was not even being accused of hitting anything with a rock. He was being accused of throwing a stone on a street. And what Mohammed later said in a sworn affidavit was that when they picked him up from his house, or abducted him, I should say, they beat him in the Jeep on the way to the military detention center, which, by the way, I have heard this so many times from Palestinians who get abducted. They all get beaten in the Jeep. So this is just like a thing that they do. I mean, they beat them everywhere, I guess, but they beat them in the Jeep. They then get to Ofer, which is a military detention center. So I think your viewers probably know that Palestinians in the West Bank are subject to military law. law, and that includes children. So, they're facing basically a military tribunal as opposed to civil law. And so he's taken to military detention. He's interrogated. I've seen the video of part of the interrogation. He's got his blindfold is like around his neck, so it's clear they just pulled it down, and he's rocking back and forth. He looks terrified, frankly. He's a really little guy, by the way. This is like a 15-year-old who is a little, has not hit his growth spurt yet, let's say. And they keep asking him over and over and over, or they keep accusing him over and over of throwing stones. And apparently what Mohammed said later in an affidavit was that they threatened to beat him again if he didn't confess. And so he finally confessed to throwing a stone. And so basically, it's unclear exactly at what point charges were filed. I mean, they can just hold people basically indefinitely under administrative detention. But at some point, charges were filed. His family was forbidden from visiting him for 9.5 months, not just in the beginning, but they would get notified that there was a court date coming up. They would go to the court, and then they would be told from the court, the military court, that the hearing was delayed. This happened over and over and over. So like 6 months passed without any court date. They had gotten no help whatsoever from the U.S. Embassy. And again, like these people are every bit as American as you or me, David. And so they were really just completely stuck. I mean, I think, the Israeli prison system has always been bad, but if you talk to any Palestinian who's done time, it got much, much, much worse after Ben-Gvir took over as national security minister, which was before October 7th. It was January of 2023. And, the conditions in these prisons, it's well documented from testimony from Israeli human rights groups, lots and lots of of strong reporting that, prisoners are routinely being beaten, tortured, sexually assaulted, starved. The Israeli Supreme Court actually ruled a couple months ago that the Israeli prison system was not feeding its prisoners enough for them to survive, and ordered them to feed them more, to which Ben-Gvir just said no. And so the family was basically getting they were doing everything they could to get information, to get help. Every once in a while, they would get the U.S. Embassy to put in a call, and then they would find out that he contracted scabies, or that he had low BMI. In other words, he was suffering from malnutrition. And to fast forward, I mean, there was eventually, the story didn't even break until July, when a reporter with The Guardian named Joseph Gedeon was reporting on the murder of Saifullah Moussalet, who's another Palestinian American 20-year-old who was beaten to death by settlers. And in the course of speaking with the family, he learned that Saifullah's first cousin, Mohammed, was in prison. So their mothers are sisters. I'll just say that when I was over there, after there was supposed to be a court hearing, we went and it was canceled. So we went back, and I met Mohammed's grandmother, who introduced herself by saying, one of my grandson was beaten to death in July. The other one is kidnapped by Israel. Jesus. And so anyway, but I worked with the family, and they had a couple of organizations supporting them, CARE and CCR and some others. And we just basically made a huge pressure campaign on U.S. lawmakers to force them to put in calls to the U.S. Embassy. And I mean, I can get into more detail if you want, but on Thanksgiving Day, actually, he was released, and he got to go back to his family. I mean, I'm sure, maybe people have seen photos. He is gaunt, and he looks like he hasn't seen the sun. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's a very powerful moment, and it shows the law, the advocacy that people like you are doing. A lot of people in this country have been doing on this issue can make a difference, right? But it also shows just so clearly the horrors of these prison systems, because at the moment that this person is getting out, you're seeing that I was reading that somewhere that he had lost something like 25 pounds just in the past few months. I mean, but and then you add into this fact that like this is an American citizen who is not only being kind of held under like the laws of another country, but under like the military law of another country, right? Something that is just understood as extreme. So, I mean, could you just talk a little bit about, this period of time of the advocacy for the freedom of Muhammad between, just like the first reaction from the U.S. I mean, you were saying that like the U.S. embassy would just sort of get like a missive here or there about it. There wasn't too much energy. I mean, what really started getting this moving?
So, strangely enough, Mike Huckabee actually initially expressed support and said that he would help. So after Saifullah was murdered in July, Huckabee visited his Saifullah's father, Kamal, and Kamal invited his brother-in-law, Zahir, who's Muhammad's father, to come so that they would have an opportunity to talk to him about it. So he met with them, and Kamal basically said to him, there's nothing you can do that will bring my son back, but you can bring some joy back into our lives by, getting my nephew back, by getting Muhammad back. And Huckabee said that he would fight for it. And then they didn't hear from him for the rest of the time. He called the day Muhammad was released, and he called Zahir and apologized that it took so long. But anyway, so the U.S. Embassy at first was of zero help at all. The family was just completely desperate to get somebody to help. And so I was part of a trip to D.C. in September. And the trip was, it was a delegation of Americans whose family members had been killed or abducted by Israeli settlers and soldiers. So like the elder statesmen of the group were Rachel Corrie's parents. Rachel was, killed by an Israeli soldier who ran her over with a bulldozer in Rafah in Gaza in 2002 or 2003. And then it was Saifullah's father, Kamal. It was the father of Tawfiq Abdel-Jabbar, who was killed by an Israeli soldier last January. Aysenor Agi, who was a Turkish American who was killed by an Israeli sniper at a protest last year. And Muhammad, and I think maybe some others I'm forgetting at the moment. But anyway, we went around meeting with lawmakers, and the sentiment was, first of all, it was just Democrats who were willing to meet with them on this trip. And it was people that you would expect, like Rashida Tlaib and some others. But there were a couple that you might not expect. And what they said was basically, this is horrible. There's nothing we can do to help you. And they would, sign a letter and make a phone call, but they all sort of express this like helplessness. Unfortunately, Israel does what it wants, and there's nothing that we can do. And again, to punctuate it, we've got Rachel Corrie's parents in there who it's been 20 years and they haven't gotten any justice for their daughter being murdered. And so there was this feeling basically that, first of all, they were not going to be able to get Muhammad out through the Israeli military court system because, first of all, you can do 20 years for throwing a stone, according to their laws. Jesus, and also like he just wasn't facing a trial. They just kept delaying it and delaying it.
And how common is that, by the way, Jasper, that, people can just sort of be held basically indefinitely under that system?
Oh yeah, no, extremely common. There's thousands and thousands of people under administrative detention. Administrative detention, the way it actually works under Israeli law is basically the prosecutor presents, and I'm using scare quotes here for anyone listening, secret evidence to a judge that says it would be a national security threat to publicly present this evidence, to publicly charge this person. So we have to just keep him under administrative detention with no charge and without even notifying the suspect of what they're being charged with. Technically, administrative detention is good for 6 months, but you can just go keep renewing it. And so people do years and years and years without ever even knowing what they're being charged with, because they're not being charged with anything, without even knowing what they're being accused of. So it's extremely common. There's over the last number I saw was over 10,000 Palestinians in Israeli military detention, and a couple thousand of them are without charge. So, no due process, no opportunity to to plead their case. And I should also say that Israel on October 7th, 2023, declared just unilaterally that they were no longer going to allow Red Cross visits to prisoners. It's international law that you have to allow the Red Cross to visit prisoners, what they call security prisoners. So in Israel, this encompasses everybody from a Hamas fighter that they capture in Gaza or on October 7th to a 15-year-old who threw a stone. These are all security prisoners. So point is, Mohammed and every other prisoner have not been visited by the Red Cross. They're not allowed to see their families. They occasionally are able to speak to a lawyer. But yeah, I mean, it's, the Israeli human rights group, B'Tselem, calls it a network of torture camps.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, as you're advocating here, I mean, so you have this meeting with certain Congress people, like there's a little bit of interest in like showing of support. But I mean, one of the things, especially over the past few weeks, have been, this phone call campaign, including, really wonderful videos of your mother, lining up the phone boards of Schumer and Gillibrand. Could you talk a little bit about that campaign?
Yeah. So, like I said, there was, the family understood we're not going to get him out through the, judicial system such as it exists. And their U.S. embassy is not stepping up. And certainly, the higher ups at the State Department, the White House never even acknowledged that, there was an American hostage in Israel. And so the feeling was the only way that they're going to get him out is by making this a big enough headache for U.S. lawmakers that they decide to do something. And so the phone banking, that was basically the goal, like drive these people insane by calling them every single day until they offload the problem to the U.S. embassy in Israel. And so in my mom's call script, she made sure to shame them and to basically say, I've been calling you every single day and I have these call logs and I will share these call logs so that everybody knows that you did nothing. And I mean, it seemed to have had some effect. There were more calls being made. We were made aware. The thing that we think basically tipped it over the edge was that, after there was some sort of momentum developing, the Israeli embassy in Washington circulated a memo to U.S. lawmakers on the Hill that was basically like their position on Mohammed's case. And it was just like a document full of smears, misinformation, omissions, just categorical lies. And the goal of it was very clearly to erode any support that these lawmakers were giving to Mohammed, to shut them up. That memo got leaked to me pretty much immediately, and everything in it conflicted with the facts that we had even from the U.S. embassy and their limited visits. They were able to get a hold of a Israeli prison medical report, which directly contradicted what was said in the Israeli embassy's document. And so that contradiction, and then next, Netanyahu, actually, his office put out a statement also full of lies. And so we took those contradictions and then basically put those at the forefront of the campaign, these pressure campaigns. Then some media started picking up on it. And basically what we think happened is that the calls started going from just the U.S. embassy to now also going to Israeli authorities, the Israeli prison system, the prime minister's office. So suddenly ABC News is calling them. They're getting calls from Washington. And at a certain point, the prosecutor basically reached out to Mohammed's lawyer and said, okay, let's make a deal. And it happened in a matter of 2 days. And so it's clear that they could have done that any time, obviously. And they just finally decided to do it after enough pressure came from the U.S. to make it a big enough headache that they just wanted to get rid of it.
Well, I want to get to the West Bank more broadly, but before we move on to that, I mean, could you just talk about, from what you've been able to gather, what it's been like for Mohammed to be freed? I mean, I can't imagine being that age and having gone through that, what just like returning to everyday life would be like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of joy. Well, I know it's a lot of joy. And just, he said to his father right when he got out, he asked him, like, is this a dream? Am I dreaming? I mean, he actually couldn't believe it. He thought that he was going to waste away there forever. And remember, this is now he's 16. He was 15 before when he was arrested. He hadn't been able to speak with his parents. This is a child that we're talking about who, lived at his family's home like any other child. And he got out, and I was just completely shocked. He was not able to like eat solid foods for the first few days, or very minimally, because he'd been starved for almost a year. And so he was, they sent me a video of him eating soup, and he's struggling, but he's happy and they're happy. And I mean, the other really great thing that happened was that 2 days after Mohammed got out, the lawyer then was able to leverage the deal that he made for Mohammed to get his 3 friends out.
That's great.
And so that was like also thrilling for him. The really dark note over all this is that one of the big questions hanging over Mohammed's release was whether or not he knew that his cousin had been murdered while he was in prison, his first cousin. Mm-hmm. Sometimes a prisoner gets brought in and they bring in news from the outside world. But other than that, they have no idea what's going on outside the walls of the prison. They have nothing. And so they didn't know if he knew, and it turned out he didn't know. And when they told him, he basically had a panic attack. And, he's had to reckon with that, or to cope with that. And I actually just interviewed his father yesterday, Saifullah's father, Kamal, who was telling me that as much as this is like it's such a joyful time, it's like his son was killed again, because he's now watching his nephew. It's as if it just happened. He has to explain it to his nephew. And so that has cast a dark cloud over all of it. But, now they have to figure out like logistics. I mean, he missed a year of school.
Yeah.
And so they have to like figure out how to get his life back in order. But more than anything else, I think they're very happy to have him home.
Well, I mean, and again, like, the work here that you and others did is truly amazing. And I think, in a story, in a context that can be really heartbreaking, it is inspiring, frankly, to be able to see that, like, if you fight, good things can come. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the West Bank more broadly. Your reporting on your Substack, Infinite Jazz, is incredible on this. People should definitely subscribe and keep up with it. You write about the dichotomy between the good and the bad settler. What do you mean by that?
So I'll start with the bad settlers. The bad settlers are the ones that people see in videos on Instagram or Twitter of, sort of feral looking, people coming out of the hills wearing masks, clubbing people, stoning people, sometimes shooting people, burning down their homes. I mean, they're wreaking havoc. Sometimes they're young. Well, they're anywhere from like probably 9 years old into their 30s and 40s. And some of them go by the moniker Hilltop Youth, but these are the violent settlers, basically. The good settlers are the ones who live in the really established settlements, and they look like, frankly, anybody who would live in Israel. I mean, these settlements that have been around for decades they might as well be cities in Israel. So they are, professionals. They're lawyers, they're accountants, they're doctors. They have nice homes with white picket fences, and they have children who go to school there. And as far as they're concerned, like, they live in Israel. The dichotomy is important because every couple of years, the bad settlers make enough noise that it becomes a problem for Israel on 2 fronts. One of them is that it becomes a PR problem. So when enough of these videos get out, like, I documented a masked settler clubbing a Palestinian grandmother that drew outrage from around the world. Israel at some point has to address it and act like they're doing something to stop it. The other reason it can be a problem is because, frankly, there are politicians in Israel who do not support the settlement movement, and it's a huge headache for them, and including for the military. Sometimes it's a huge headache to have these guys running around causing problems all the time. Now, despite the fact that there are people, including the good settlers, who will condemn the bad settlers, there are people who will condemn them. Netanyahu called them fringe anarch youth or something, and troublemakers, and talk about arresting them and stuff. But when you look closely, what's happening is the bad settlers are basically pushing the boundaries of the settlements in the most literal sense. So, I mean, there's an amazing example of this that literally broke today, where Netanyahu was reported to have basically offered his support for a plan that would authorize, I forget how many, maybe 22 outposts. So what that means is an outpost is an illegal settlement. So it's not been authorized by Israel, that these violent settlers went out and built, as in they just ran out onto Palestinian land, planted a flag, put a tent down, and claimed it as their own. These are where the attacks are coming from. The settlers are building these outposts and launching attacks. The military, the Israeli government, claims that they're going to come shut it down. Netanyahu announces a project to curb violence, and then behind the scenes he authorizes turning these outposts into settlements. And so the violent settlers, they sometimes get thrown under the bus. They sometimes are like the sacrificial lambs, but they are quite literally the ones who are seizing the land that the good settlers then come in and build a settlement on, and then the state comes and authorizes. And so, they are the tip of the spear of the settlement movement. I think that the system has to release pressure. And so they do occasionally dismantle outposts, or very rarely they actually make an arrest, like they arrested the guy who clubbed the grandmother. But it's, this is like a tiny fraction of the actual momentum, because what they're really doing is they're authorizing these outposts and ethnically cleansing the West Bank.
And I mean, I think one thing that people again should read your reporting on this, Jasper. But one of the things that I think that you really note, in addition to your on the ground reporting, is the way that these things do get kind of written about or reported about. And I thought one thing that was kind of notable in some of these recent events that you kind of witnessed and covered was how they were using terms like young folks, right, or like young people, right, and try to make it seem like, oh, these are just kind of teenagers getting worked up, but these are grown men. All right, these are people in their 30s. Not everybody, but a lot of them who they're writing about aren't these kind of young kids just getting worked up in the moment, right?
Well, the ones actually committing violence are a mix of kids and men. I mean, the guy who attacked the grandmother was 24, but the people who are sending them out are grown men, for sure. I mean, literally, there was this incredible op-ed in Arutz Sheva, which is like the settler's favorite paper. I think I wrote about it in that article, Good Settler, Bad Settler, where there's a grown man literally describing how him and the other sort of professionals map out what they consider vulnerable Palestinian land. And then they send out the young people, which again, sometimes it's teenagers, sometimes it's men, but they send them out to go seize it. So, I mean, it's like on some level, this is like imperial conquest, right? I mean, you have the older, wealthier, privileged people in a room sending out the grunts to go and do the dirty work. So that's what's happening. And one more thing, David, actually, I mean, Netanyahu actually, in his condemnation a couple weeks ago, he said something very revealing, which is he condemned, I forget the term he used, maybe the violent youth who are taking the law into their own hands. And so what he's saying is that, this is our job. It's the Israeli government's job to go out and brutalize Palestinians and steal their land. But these guys are going out, wearing masks. They're doing it in this way that's causing this bad press for us, and we condemn them. But we're the ones who should be doing it. And that is really, in a nutshell, what this whole thing is. The bad settlers sometimes make them look bad, but at the end of the day, they're doing the state's bidding.
I mean, they're playing a 100% a structural role in this process, right? And I mean, I wanted, for people who haven't been reading your work and keeping up with what's been going on in the West Bank, just, you know, over the past few months, I mean, could you talk about particularly, like, you know, as the ceasefire, you know, quotes around that, you know, has been ongoing, like, I mean, what has it been like in the West Bank when it comes to settler violence?
It's been spinning out of control. I mean, October was the worst month in terms of reported settler attacks since the UN has been keeping track in like 20 years, since the Second Intifada, I think. And, you know, these attacks are happening all over the West Bank, from the north, near the refugee camps, to the regions around Ramallah, to the south, the Jordan Valley, the Hebron Hills. They're everywhere. And, you know, like I said, there's very, very rarely any actual arrests. And a lot of the time, in fact, the army is going out there with the settlers and launching attacks. And so there are communities in the West Bank, the like sort of privileged communities, like the one that Muhammad is from, Al-Mazrah al-Sharqiyya, and a wealthy American community that has actually not faced violence before. Only in the last couple of years are they now being attacked too. And it's because the settlers are just as emboldened as they've ever been. But the other thing that's happening that does not get covered at all in the West, and in my mind, it's much more sort of nefarious, is that there is just like an incredible effort underway in the Knesset and in the ministries to pass legislation, to pass executive orders, to create new policy that are effectively annexing the West Bank. There's a new law right now that's advancing through the Knesset that will allow anybody in Israel to just buy land in the West Bank, to just like buy a plot of land. And, you know, this is the kind of thing that is never going to make the paper here, but it has the potential to radically transform the land ownership in what is Palestinian land. You know, Israel does not, they don't count the deeds that the Palestinians have as legitimate. A lot of them have deeds that go back to the Jordanian rule before 1967, and Israel just doesn't count them as real. There's a new law that gives the Israeli archaeology department basically the ability to now, quote, maintain heritage sites in Area B. So Area B is ostensibly administered by the Palestinian Authority. And what this is saying is now Israeli authorities can go into Area B where there are archaeological sites, and basically the entire West Bank is an archaeological site. And they can now accuse Palestinians of like desecrating the grounds by having a house that's been there for decades, and they can knock down the house. But again, like, the New York Times is not writing a story about a new antiquities law passed in Israel. And that is by design. I mean, Smotrich, who is, you know, a settler himself, he's the finance minister in Israel, but he effectively runs the West Bank governance now. He is like, I mean, he's like, I don't know, like Mitch McConnell 10 years ago. He's just like an incredibly effective bureaucrat. He knows how to use the levers. He knows how to, you know, pit people against each other. And he's just passed like this flurry of new policy that has just further marginalized Palestinians. It has, you know, he has installed settlers to be in charge of all the like settlement building approvals and things like that. And so the point I'm making is that all the violence is just trickling down from that. The reason that, you know, these violent settlers are able to like push into new areas is because like the settlements have been able to push further out into what they call like new neighborhoods. So like a settlement builds a new neighborhood and Israel authorizes it. Like, okay, that's not a story, a new neighborhood. But what it actually means is they just stole more Palestinian land and expanded their settlement. And now the bad settlers are pushing out even further. So all these things are happening behind the scenes very quietly. Nobody's covering it. I mean, you know, there are like Haaretz covers it pretty regularly. And some of the more left-leaning papers in Israel, but in the West, you hear about, you know, a violent olive harvest season as if it's just sort of happening in a vacuum.
I think that's an important bit too, right? Is that like the violence of the settlers, one, it terrorizes people, it displaces people, it kills people. But it also gives, I don't know, respectable politicians in the U.S. and in Israel something to point to, say, I'm against that, you know, while all this other stuff is going on. You know, just to kind of paint a picture for us in the last few minutes, Jasper, I mean, you spent a lot of time out here now, right? Could you talk about like what life is like for Palestinians in the West Bank? I'm sure, you know, there's a wide variety of what that experience is like, but I'm sure, you know, people also kind of, you know, they live lives, they fall in love, they have children, but then you just have this specter of like arbitrary authority that can kind of just sit on you. I mean, could you just sort of take us through, you know, what the world is like for people living in this situation?
Yeah, it's funny, like just, you know, point you made about it being sort of a varied landscape. I mean, I'll answer your question in a second, but like there was this funny incident where, I was in the Hebron Hills in Masriyata, which is, you know, these Bedouin communities that are basically like, you know, they live in under the constant threat of their homes being demolished. Settlers are attacking them constantly, and you know, they're shepherds. I went straight from there to Al Mazar Al Sharqiya, which is more like Miami, and I was talking to the people there, the guys there, and it like the way I was describing life in Masriyata, like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. So it was like I was explaining it to a group of Americans, which I was. And so like, and then you go to one of the refugee camps in the north, and you know, their life is closer to what I think it's like for people in Gaza right now. So it really is all over the map. I mean, you know, I think that hopefully people know this, but sometimes you don't realize until you like see it really closely that, like you say, I mean, life goes on in this town, Al Khair, which is in Masriyata. This is where a settler murdered Auda Hathalin, a Palestinian activist there, shot him in cold blood a couple months ago. They now have a settler outpost right next door that is encroaching on them more and more. They're under constant threat. They're being attacked all the time. But there's also like 100 little kids in this village that are constantly running around being like little maniac children, you know, eating candy, having sugar highs. And they basically are like running a summer camp there. When they're not dealing with, you know, the violent settlers. And like to just put a fine point on it, I was like playing soccer with some kids, and literally like feet behind us were these settlers with huge machine guns slung over their shoulders, tearing down one of the village's fences. And, you know, I was just trying to distract the kids from seeing their village being destroyed, basically. So, you know, another, a friend in a town called Sebastia, like they're under constant threat. You know, people are being shot and beaten all the time, but he's on Tinder and he's going on dates, and he showed me Tinder. It's hilarious. And you know, like I obviously can't name names here, but like there's some places in the West Bank where they drink. In Ramallah, there's actually a couple of clubs. So like life goes on, and also like there are some places that are still pretty insulated. So they're kind of living like normal, very isolated lives because they're kind of like boxed in by the occupation, but it's all over the map. And, but I'm glad you asked that because, you know, one of the sort of like goals of my reporting is to not just paint the Palestinians as these like forever suffering people, to show that like, first of all, they're fighting. Like they're fighting very hard in different ways. Some of them, you know, by actually taking up arms, but a lot of them through activism or through legal routes. But they also are just like really nice, warm people. And, you know, I'm Jewish, and everybody there who I've gotten to know knows that I'm Jewish. And like we've spent hours and hours and hours just like talking about you know, the conflict between Israel and Palestine and like what it means, and like, you know, the veracity of this idea of like ancient anti-Semitism in the Arab world. So like, you know, the people there also have diverse political views. So like, I remember talking to somebody about this, like there's like the statistic that the Israelis love to throw out about like how many people in the West Bank support Hamas. And they use it as like an indictment of them. You talk to people in the West Bank, and it's like talking to people anywhere. They have different political views. They believe in different political parties. Some of them believe in a two-state solution. Some of them believe in a one-state solution. Some of them don't give a shit. They just want to be left alone. So they really are, I guess what I'm saying is like, they're like anybody else, but they're living under this, like you said, specter of being run off their land at all times.
Yeah, I mean, and I think one thing too, just maybe in closing, if you could just talk about like, some of that isolation. I mean, that's by design, right? The fact that like communities, like you can't, it's hard for Palestinians to kind of move freely around the West Bank.
Oh yeah, no, that's it's like impossible to get from place to place. I mean, first of all, there's roads that they can't go on. So like Israelis have yellow license plates, Palestinians have white license plates. And if you have a white license plate, there's a lot of roads that you just can't go on. There's also gates around communities. A lot of them have been installed in the last 2 years, and like randomly they will just shut a gate, and which means just nobody can leave. So like I was traveling from one town to another, and as we were going, a gate just shut. And at the gate, there was like just a massive traffic jam, and there were like people with trucks that were like, on commercial routes or doing business that were literally like carrying the goods from the truck to meet another truck on the other side of the gate. And so it's just like they're constantly just finding ways to make their lives difficult. Yeah, I mean, the West Bank is like full of beautiful places that people like to vacation, and they really just can't do it anymore. I mean, I do think it's worth sort of putting a fine point on the fact that like things have always been bad in the West Bank or the occupation has always been bad, I should say, but it has like definitively gotten much, much worse, both since the new government in the beginning of 2023 and then after October 7th, and it just continues to get worse. And so people who were living pretty decent lives, traveling around, they would go to Jordan, they would go to Egypt. Sometimes they would go to like the beaches in Tel Aviv, and they just can't do it anymore. There's tens of thousands of Palestinians who used to work in Israel who just can't go anymore. So people are out of work. I mean, like basically the place is just being strangled off, and like anywhere, it's the most vulnerable people who are being affected, in the most immediate way by going broke, not having food, losing their homes, but everybody's feeling it. And, the Palestinian Authority, such as it can be said to even like be governing the West Bank, is, running out of money, and they have no legitimacy with the people. Yeah. So it's really it's a bad situation.
Jasper Nathaniel, it was really wonderful having you on the Jacobin program. You can keep up with Jasper's work on Substack at Infinite Jazz. Is there anything else or places people can keep up with your work and follow you?
No, just Infinite Jazz is my handle on all social media too. Maybe I'll just say one thing, like yes, now that Mohammed is out, and there's lots of stories that need attention, but one that I'm going to start talking about constantly is this town called Sebastia. Sebastia is it's one of these towns that is just filled with sort of archaeological wonders, and Israel has put tens of millions of dollars into transforming it into what people call a biblical Disneyland. So they're basically running the Palestinians off their land to turn into a theme park for Jewish people and Israelis. And they just served them with a confiscation order for about 25% of their land. So we're going to be launching just a huge sort of awareness campaign to try to prevent it from happening. But just keep an eye out on Sebastia. I wrote a story in the Drift magazine last year called In Ruins, which you can read for more information. But yeah, just keep your ears open for more about Sebastia.
Well, folks, we'll have links to all of that below. Thank you so much again, Jasper, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks a lot, David.
Well, thank you so much, folks, for tuning in. It was really great having Jasper on the program, wasn't it, Matt?
Yeah, Jasper's the best.
Yeah, no, he really is doing the work.
Stunning, frankly, and also embarrassing our entire media industry, like the establishment places that a guy does a career change midlife and becomes one of the best reporters on the West Bank.
No, 100%. So folks, go and support and follow Jasper's work. We have a lot of wonderful things coming up in the next few weeks on the Jacobin Show. So be sure that you like and subscribe to the Jacobin and the magazine as well. And don't forget to check Matt and I out every Tuesday on Left Reckoning if you haven't already. But without further ado, folks, we'll see you. Have a good rest of your weekend and talk to you soon.